Let's talk about some Buddhist practices. Buddhism largely died out in India around the time period of the 12th to 15th century. There are still a few Buddhists in India. There are Tibetan Buddhists, as we mentioned, right? They developed in Tibet, but they flee to India. But it is not certainly as prominent as it once was. But there's still a lot of things that are shaped by Indian culture. And, you know, there's still some things that are rather interesting about Buddhist practices that have been shaped by Indian culture, but that have also been shaped by other things as well. We've emphasized several times already how meditation is a very important part of Buddhism of the varieties. You know, all schools consider meditation to be very important, even though they're going to differ on what it is meant to achieve, how it is to be done, you know, a variety of things like that. In the history of Buddhism, most of its history has been, meditation has been an elite practice, right? It's the monastics, or it's the you know, the people in the upper echelons of Buddhism that have practiced. But in more recent years, it has become a more common practice. Part of this may be due to the westernization of Buddhism and how throughout the 20th century Westerners have kind of taken Buddhist ideas just like they had done with Hinduism and kind of incorporated some of those things into their own lives, making meditation something more widespread. Mindfulness is the goal in meditation in general, and it's essentially a very extremely important part of the entire path towards enlightenment. And mindfulness, of course, is one of the steps on the Eightfold Path. And so a lot of meditation in a lot of different types of Buddhism focuses on, you know, the meditating on suffering, on impermanence, you know, the fact that there is not a self. The practice of meditation is very simple to understand. You remain motionless, you focus all your awareness on your breath, and you let go of all intervening thoughts, with the idea being that you're creating this heightened awareness, this higher state that will help cultivate this spiritual insight. But the actual practice of meditation is very difficult. I don't know if you've ever tried to kind of clear your mind of all your thoughts, right, and remain focused and not be distracted by other things. But it's often something that takes people some time to achieve, right? So this is not something that most people are able to do kind of immediately, but is something that you must undergo throughout you know, a period of time. Remember when we were talking about the Eightfold Path, that idea of right mindfulness, right effort, is something that will that it's skillful, right? You're trying to develop this and become better at clearing your mind and remaining focused and not being distracted by the world around you. Another rather interesting Buddhist practice, again, several of these are not across the board. They're not found in every form of Buddhism, but they're just some practices I thought were kind of interesting, is the conjoined practices of punya and dana. Punya means merit, and dana refers to giving, a giving ritual. You can kind of see this in the picture in the upper right-hand corner. With a lot of monastics in various religious traditions, a lot of how they survive is based off of the larger community of that religion supporting them, right? That they provide for their needs, providing food, providing finances, etc. And the same kind of thing's true in many forms of Buddhist monasticism as well. And so dana is a way of giving back to the monastics, helping those that are, you know, trying to show the common people the way to nirvana. And so the monastic community, according to some traditions, were instructed to be a field of merit, where people could plant good karma, could plant devotions, and harvest good karma, right? That's what I meant. So they're planting donations and they're harvesting good karma. And so punya refers to this idea of by helping out monastics or by doing good acts, you are making merit. Now, some traditions say that you need good merit to achieve a good rebirth. Merit making can lead you closer to nirvana. And so by making these donations, by focusing on these spiritual giving, you can achieve this merit, this good karma. Now, in the history of Buddhism, some aspects of this have been really, really laid out in very intricate types of ways. So, for example, in this scorecard from the 1500s, a man named Zhaofian Yuan kind of created this guide to how you can formulate merit and how you can understand your merit. Now, again, this is just one example. This isn't something that's representative, but it is rather kind of an interesting approach to this issue. And so this idea of, the balance of karma, right, good and bad, but also merit, right, merit helping you create good karma. While certain actions are better, are going to achieve more merit, while certain actions are worse and are going to achieve demerits and worse demerits. How they came up with this list, how this person came up with this list is, I don't really know, but it's a rather interesting one. So, for example, if you save someone's life, that's 100 merits. If you cure a major illness, that's 10. Prevent a lawsuit, 5. Chant a Buddhist scripture, that's 1. I've not seen, is there a certain number? Like, if you hit 10,000, do you get the express lane to nirvana? There's no indication of that. But on the other side, of course, you have the demerits. If you cause a death, if you rape someone or you end a family lineage, 100. If you mistreat an orphan, 10 demerits. If you waste food, that's 1 demerit. But to make up for it, you can just chant a Buddhist scripture, right? So if you throw out too much food, you chant a Buddhist scripture or help repair a public road. Okay, the public road. But if you repair a public road, that's 1 merit. If you bury an animal, that's 3. Again, I don't know how all this was developed. This is a rather interesting scorecard. But this idea, right, the greater idea of, your actions kind of balance each other out, and ultimately you want to do more good in the world than harm. And so, again, it's not representative, just an interesting little example from Buddhist history. Another expression of Buddhist practice involves the observance of festivals connected to the life of the Buddha. Things like remembering his death, the date he achieved enlightenment. There is a difference among Buddhists on the date of some of these things, as far as what day of the year you should be celebrating them on. A lot of it's shaped regionally, but still the idea of the remembering the Buddhist life. Buddhists, of course, have a variety of rituals connected with death. Many of them, especially in India and some other places in East Asia, very similar to other ceremonies in India, so cremation, for example. But although there are some similarities between Buddhist practices and other traditions, it also becomes a time for a reminder of the Buddhist teachings on impermanence, on rebirth, detachment. Ultimately, in a lot of these death practices, you see this kind of tension between, certain claims about Buddhism and the actual lived practice of it. So the idea of achieving, there are some practices that you as the griever, right, the mourner, the family left behind, can engage in, and that can transfer karma to the deceased. Which is kind of this, is karma something affected by your own actions, or can other people shape it? How does the proper performance of ritual add into all this? But essentially, this kind of notion of inevitability, all things are going to pass away. You shouldn't be attached, to someone. All these things are a part of the death rituals of Buddhists. Particularly interesting are the practices related to Tibetan Buddhism. There's a lot of quite a bit of difference between Tibetan Buddhism and other forms of Buddhism. One of the most widely read books in the West, as far as Buddhist texts, has to do with death, known as the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Essentially, the Book of the Dead is a manual on how to perform funerals in Tibetan Buddhism. The proper name, or at least one of them, of the book is Liberation Through Hearing in the Intermediate States. It's believed that the consciousness goes through 3 states after death. Usually believes that between death and rebirth are about 49 days. And as it passes through these states, these intermediate states between death and rebirth, there is the possibility that that consciousness could still achieve liberation and not be reborn. And this is achieved through hearing some things that are spoken, particularly by lamas, Buddhist monks, Tibetan Buddhist monks, during this time period. And so this person passing from birth to death. It's believed that, here you are in this intermediate state, not dead, right, not physical anymore, but not quite reborn. And so, this is an opportunity where it's easier for someone to recognize the absolute truths of reality and experience enlightenment. The first stage is known as the clear light state, or the experience of the great luminosity. Essentially, the idea is that the soul, the consciousness, not the soul, the consciousness encounters this blinding white light that is terrifying to it. And as the lamas read these passages, the consciousness is encouraged to stay calm, to not be afraid. That in effect, the great luminosity, this blinding white light, is a projection of the mind. It is not real. And that if you realize that the luminosity is not real, but something that you've projected from yourself, you can achieve nirvana. And that will release you from samsara. But if you can't quite recognize the luminosity as a projection, you should try to see yourself and the light as one united element and not 2 separate things. And of course, most people don't achieve this. And so they move on to the next state, which is the encounter of a parade of ugly, wrathful Buddhas, about 58 of them, and then a parade of beautiful Buddhas, about 42 of them. The goal at this stage for the consciousness is to not be too repelled by the wrathful Buddhas or too attracted by the benevolent Buddhas, but simply recognize now that these are just a projection of your mind, of your consciousness. They are not real. If you can accomplish this, if you can recognize the emptiness of this distinction, you will achieve liberation. But again, most people don't do that. So they go to rebirth. The consciousness sees various scenes of animals having sex with each other, human beings having sex with each other, and they are drawn to one of these pairs, right? That these are going to become your parents. And it's believed that you're going to be reborn in one of 6 realms: the realms of the gods or the demigods, of humans, animals, of the hungry ghosts, or demons. Right? And so you're drawn to one of these places. Your karma, however, is going to shape that. It's going to cause you to join one of these scenes, become one with it, and be reborn into it. The words of the text are said by the Lama. They're meant to provide a reference point for the consciousness. And so the focus is that as you are preparing for dying, you need to have a positive mental state so that after death, your consciousness will be in the best place to experience this transition. After this takes place, the body is stripped after a period of mourning. It's put in a fetal position, wrapped in a wool blanket, and then we'll experience what is known as a sky burial in Tibet or in Tibetan Buddhist communities. They'll take the body to a remote mountain. The flesh and the muscle will be stripped from the bones. The bones will be ground to dust, and essentially it will be fed to the vultures. If someone was a beggar or destitute or was a widow, their bodies will be buried in water. Thieves, murderers, the leprous, the people that had smallpox, other diseases are buried in the earth. And so the goal is, of course, this sky burial. So again, one of the things that's quite interesting about Tibetan Buddhism that makes it different from other types of Buddhism. Let's talk briefly about some of the ideas or how some of the expressions of Buddhism in the United States. As with Hinduism, the first experience that a lot of people had with Buddhism was through the Transcendentalists, Emerson, Thoreau, others. But as they were translating Hindu scriptures, they also turned to Buddhist scriptures and translated them as well. Here too, a lot of it was the Transcendentalists trying to say, okay, these are like our ideas, right? They're not becoming Buddhists, but they're understanding Buddhist concepts in terms of their own views of transcendentalism, this universal spirit, you know, and some of the other things that are going on. However, Buddhism doesn't really make much of an inroads in the 19th century in the United States because a lot of people believe it to be very pessimistic. It's so focused on suffering. While in the 19th century in the United States, there were a lot of positive people, right? An optimistic time. And so the focus on inevitability, impermanence, suffering was something that a lot of people were not attracted to in the 19th century. In the 20th century, however, the work of D.T. Suzuki, began to bring some of a change to that. Suzuki came to the United States in the late 19th century, serving as a translator of Buddhist texts. In the 1930s, however, he started lecturing in a variety of universities throughout the United States, places like Harvard, Princeton, Yale. Served as a visiting professor at several of these universities. Would go on to write or translate a variety of Buddhist books into English. Suzuki was a Zen Buddhist, but a lot of his early works were just on Buddhism in general, figuring that Westerners didn't have much knowledge of Buddhism, and so just focusing on just learning about Buddhism and then going on and these later works were specifically about Zen. Also very influential in the development of Buddhism in the United States was the work of the Beat poets. Suzuki found an audience, especially in these kind of American intellectuals who were dissatisfied with American culture. So people like Alan Watts, Allen Ginsberg, Jack Kerouac, who had been Catholic but converts to Buddhism. It was a lot of things that the Beat poets already felt about American culture. In the 50s and 60s, they're concerned about the imperialism of the United States in Korea, in Vietnam, in other places. They're concerned of the hypocrisy in American culture, and especially in American Christianity. And this emphasis on this spiritual enlightenment, respect for all forms of life, spoke to a lot of these people who were already disaffected with American culture and religion. And so it provides them a way to continue their critique of these things. And so this becomes very useful for this particular group. And through that, it's spread to others as well. Last thing I want to talk about, of course, but the last thing I want to talk about is popular culture. Buddhism has made inroads in popular culture in the United States throughout the latter part of the 20th century and even into the 21st century. It showed up among music groups, the Beastie Boys, popular rappers in the 1990s, wrote a song called Bodhisattva Vow, which said, think on the Dharma and the enlightened ones who've graduated samsara. So it shows up in music. It shows up among celebrities, a variety of celebrities, people like Richard Gere, Bruce Lee, known for Kung Fu, but was a Zen Buddhist. And so a lot of his practice of Kung Fu was related to his notions about Buddhism. It shows up in things like sports as well. Phil Jackson, very popular coach with the Bulls, with the Lakers, is also a Buddhist. This shows up even in I believe it was a Super Bowl commercial a couple of years ago, where Phil Jackson stars in this car commercial, and he's referred to as the Zen Master. He wrote his memoirs, Sacred Hoops, where he advised his reader, if you meet the Buddha in the lane, feed him the ball, right? And so this kind of combination of sports and Buddhism. And even in popular movies, television shows, things like The Matrix, the impermanence of reality, the falseness of reality, there's some Hindu Buddhist concepts in that. A lot in Star Wars as well. There's a lot of connections here. The Ewoks, usually despised by a lot of very hardcore fans, but they spoke high-speed Tibetan. So they took Tibetan speaking and then kind of sped it up. So there's that connection. The Jedi were to be detached from possessions, from people. The idea of desire being the path to the desire being the path to the dark side. So you're supposed to have this disinterested compassion. Even the idea, of course, of being absorbed in the Force has some connotations here. This overlap between Hinduism and Buddhism. So there's a lot of things that are really kind of interesting in how Buddhism is making inroads into American culture in a wide variety of ways, some of which are more obvious Buddhist ideas, and some of which that are not. So that finishes us up with Buddhism for this section. The next class we'll be talking about we'll talk about comparing the two, Hinduism and Buddhism, as well as thinking about dialogue. between Hindus and Buddhists and Christians. Where are some places? Because with Christianity and Judaism, there are some obvious places where conversations can start. It would seem on the surface of it, it's a lot more difficult when we come to some of these Eastern religions, because even the whole worldview is completely distinct. And so we'll talk about that on Tuesday's class. Again, don't forget, get the reflective essay in. Don't forget about the exam coming up, and don't forget to complete any assignments that you haven't completed up to this point. And so we'll